Thank you and welcome to today's Tarragon talk for Paint Me This House of Love by Chelsea Woolley. My name is Myekah Payne. I'm the Associate Artistic Director here at Tarragon. Let me introduce everybody who's sitting next to me. So Catherine Jun is a registered psychotherapist and a former board member of Cahoots Theatre. She has a BA in history, an honors BA in history from McGill University, and a BA in journalism from Toronto Metropolitan University, and is also a certified peer support group facilitator at the Gatehouse, an institution that deals with survivors of childhood sexual interference, assault, and abuse. In her own words, Catherine believes we are resilient and strong, and that focusing on ourselves and our mental health is one of the most selfless things we can do, because it means we'll have more to give to the people we love. Chelsea Woolley, next, is a playwright, arts educator, and certified teacher. As an arts educator, she has directed musical theater and is the creator and program director of the Mixed Arts Performance Partnership Program, which connects young artists living in precarity to professional artistic mentorship. As a playwright, Chelsea has developed work with Nightwood Theatre, the Banff Centre for the Arts, and the National New Play Network's Playwrights Workshop at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and most recently, her new play here at Tarragon. So thank you both for joining me here and having a little chat. So my first question for the two of you, and sort of is in relation to the play, in your own words, what would you consider an ideal family construct, if one actually exists out there in the world?
Well, so the question, for context, if you haven't seen the play yet, is the play is about a family that's really trying to connect and figure each other out and reconnect and talk to each other. And so I think for me, what's an ideal family? I think it's a family that knows that there's no such thing as an ideal family, you know, like that. I think if you know that, then the channel for communication is more open, because you're willing to accept responsibility, you're willing to talk through your mistakes, you're willing to try to reach, like, to understand what other people are saying. Being more open than perhaps the characters of this play are to understanding their part in either intentionally or unintentionally causing harm to the other people in their family.
Yeah, so open individuals, or people who at least understand themselves and the people around them, hopefully will create an ideal family construct. Hopefully. Catherine, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, we were just joking. If anyone knows the answer, please tell us.
Please tell us.
I was thinking about this, and I think I would say an ideal family would be just the idea that you're not alone, maybe, to me, family. I think the characters in the play, without giving too much away, they feel very alone in the family, so the opposite of that, so you feel seen and supported, that there's a sense of belonging, warts and all. I think for me would be an ideal family, that you can be seen for who you are and that you feel supported and loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and just hearing you talk about that and wanting to add, then that also isn't just the people that you are born to, that actually being seen and heard, as we all know, you find your people, you find your found family and your friends and your community, and that actually can be the ideal. You're born with one set of people that can be fantastic or not, depending on luck, and then you can find the connections that actually give you those threads of community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do find that when people feel alone, that can be so isolating and harmful. So I think it's just that sense of belonging to whatever that formation of family is so important for healing. I do feel when people feel alone and isolated in whatever they're going through, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, and to stem off of that, one of the characters in this play is a little bit on the isolated side.
Which one? All of them.
I mean, all of them kind of live in their own different forms of isolation. And I think One of the ways that they do find, one of the characters at least finds connection through like online terms of having that kind of situation. And I always wonder, do you think that the connections we create online are different than the connections we create in person? Do you think that those are different connections, or do they hold kind of the same space?
I mean, I think that it stems from this sense of, I sound like a broken record a little bit, but it's just the sense of belonging is so important that you don't feel alone in this world. The world is hard and life throws you stuff, and good stuff and bad stuff. So I think it stems from a place of that yearning, but my sense is, in my opinion, it feels a bit different, the online. I mean, nothing beats, being in the physical presence of another, I think. Like, nothing beats a hug.
A hug is pretty great.
As fantastic as all the emojis are. So that's sort of my sense, but I don't know, I could be biased maybe.
No, I think I remember so vividly, and probably everybody in this room does, that period of COVID where nobody was touching each other, and I was living alone, and I was hugging trees because I was like, I need, like, actually hugging trees, and because it was helpful. But until I got my dog, which became so helpful, it was wild to like know the last time you were hugged.
Right.
Yeah. To have a date.
Like clocking the last physical contact with another human being. I do also identify with that, where it was kind of like, oh, it's been 2 weeks since I hugged
my last hug.
Since I hugged anyone.
Yeah, or been touched.
Or been
right?
touched.
Like even accidentally. On the
like
street.
the starvation for touch was also a thing. Like I feel like I shook somebody's hand and I was like, it's so good to see you. I can't let go of your hand. So I definitely understand that, and I think when we look at the connections of these characters, especially when two of them find themselves in one place, I feel like they almost immediately are like, maybe we should spend more. I don't know, but do you think that is something that when we come out of isolation that we maybe are too quick to want to connect with others without sometimes maybe at the danger of ourselves?
I don't know. I mean, it felt pretty great to like. I remember going to a friend's birthday outdoors about a year and a half into the pandemic, and it was the first sort of like gathering, and it felt so weird even to be close to people around a fire. Like it felt like I needed to back up, but it felt so good. I stayed out way too late because I was like, there's people, I can talk to people, I can be around people. But also to jump back to your question about the online thing, I'm from Alberta originally, and so many of my very, very close friends still live in Alberta. And the people that I talk to every day are people that I'm texting or phone calling, but they're not people that I see more than twice a year. But I have the closest relationship with them because we have all this access to. It's not quite online, I guess, but it's a digital relationship at this point with my best friends.
Yeah. I understand that because a lot of my friends also now are spread across the province and also the country. So we've already created those lines of communication that kind of served us even more so during the pandemic because we already were used to shooting a text or trying for a video call or something along those lines. And if anything, I think it amplified that type of connection for at least in my sake during the COVID era.
Yeah.
Let's call it an era. So coming back around to a little bit more about this play in particular and what's going on, I think I'll talk a little bit about the disjointed use of language. So without talking too much about it, there is a way in which language works in this play that kind of removes some words and it moves a little differently depending on who is communicating with one another. And I think my question around this use of language is kind of those difficult conversations we have in families, really. But like an overarching conversation, because also difficult conversations we have with friends and with people, and how that can kind of stem around the language we use, I suppose. And so do you believe that there are certain ways of communicating hard things to people that are like different from the way you would normally approach a thing?
Is there a healthier way to communicate difficult
Yeah,
things
is
to
there
people?
healthy ways?
Well, language is words are how we communicate. Otherwise, a lot of assumptions are made. It's really important to have integrity with your words so that if you're saying, because so much misunderstanding, I think, and harm can be done when we assume like, oh, that person doesn't care about me because they didn't come to my birthday party. But if the person, so the integrity was interesting because in the play, there's a lot of fantasies, I guess,
Yeah.
So having integrity with your word is so important because really, essentially, that's how we communicate with each other with words.
Yeah.
But it's also so interesting living in Canada. For example, I'm a first-gen immigrant, and my mom speaks Korean much better than English, and my English is better than my Korean. So we're not able to have those nuanced conversations, and I don't think I'm alone in this. A lot of people are in the same boat. So it's especially with those difficult conversations where nuance, the precise word, having integrity with your word is so important. That's almost kind of wiped out for a large vast of the population, I feel like, who are sort of in the first gen. So that's always been really interesting to me, that because there are conversations I would like to have with my mother, but because that's removed, how do you have that when the language isn't quite there? Like her Korean is, my Korean isn't good enough to have those nuanced conversations, and her English isn't good enough to have it either. So we're sort of in this sort of isolated states, and that's very reflective of what was happening in the play, I thought. So that was something that struck me too. So yeah, I don't think I answered the question, but.
To be fair, I don't think it was a very clear question, so I think you're doing great.
No, I think it's very interesting. Maybe this is not your experience, but this idea of being stuck in the language of sort of a childlike version of
Yes.
Korean to try to have conversations, adult conversations. You can't.
Right.
I don't know. I just summed that up. I don't know if that's true, but
Yes.
that's very interesting. That your mother's always going to see you as her child, but also you can't communicate in any way that's different than that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I still communicate like I'm 8, so there's an added. So yeah, I do think about this quite a bit.
Yeah. I also think about the generational conversation and the different languages that we use per generation, and things that are easier for us to say in one way but might not actually translate to a different generation or your parents. I do find sometimes that even in the case of speaking to, just if we're going to play with the generations, so Gen Z, Gen Millennial, Gen X, Gen. I think that everybody has a different way of communicating, and because of that, we get clouded in the things and how people interpret them. So I think my question is, have you ever come up against that? Yes, in your situation, yes, in terms of language, but also in just terms of age ranges. When we're speaking with our elders or our youngers, do you ever find that you have this lost in translation moment where you're like, well, I said this, but I guess you did not get that?
I wonder if there's an expectation of experience or knowledge. I know that's not quite what you're asking, but that I was on the streetcar today, and then it was about 3:30, and then all of a sudden it was just packed with high school students, and I was like, oh man, I picked the wrong streetcar, but they're not doing anything. They're just being young people. And so there's this preconceived notion of how they're going to communicate, and then it's going to be disruptive, and then it's going to be not interesting or disrespectful, and
Yeah, like an assumption on your part,
Yeah,
like what
yeah.
I was trying to, so that expectation. And also I was thinking how language evolves, right? So things, like I have a 14-year-old son, and the way he talks, I'm just like, that's Riz. Apparently it's a good thing because that's charisma. Do you know this?
I did not know this.
Yeah,
I
like
just learned
Riz
that
is
this
really
slaps is a thing. So I think I'm behind the times.
And then he's got a girlfriend, and she's a dime. which means that she's a 10, you know, like, so it's language
That
evolves.
seems
right?
almost like that, like you feel like you'd be watching a movie from the like 1912s, I would say. Like, you're a dime, darling.
Yeah, it kind of comes back, I guess. Yeah.
Which I do think, I mean, growing up, like, my grandmother was like, what's black? Because she didn't actually like the term black, because she didn't think that it was a term that made sense. But that's because of the placement of time, because there's colored, there's Negro, there's black. So it was all of those like different terminologies of what it is just to be yourself. That they were like, well, I don't understand, and that doesn't make any sense. And so I always wonder about that lost in translation moment of,
There's loaded words, and
Yes.
in the play I was very aware of what words are loaded, and more often than not I take them out and make that a part of the fracture. So one is you'll never hear, so it's an adult daughter and her two parents, and you'll never hear her say daughter because it's loaded. It's like, I can't be your daughter, I haven't seen you in 25 years. So she removes that word from every conversation. So it was very interesting in the workshopping of this play to have a think about what are those words that are too dangerous to say. We can't say that word because then we'd have to have the real conversation. And if we have the real conversation, someone's gonna cry. So we can't do that.
it's good to avoid certain words.
Yeah.
So daughter was the word you avoided.
Daughter was one of them, yeah.
What was
Were there other words that you?
Oh yes, I don't know off the top of my head. Love is used very specifically, and it changes too, right? Like the words she can't use, like daughter, are not the same that the dad can't use, and she cuts him off. Like he tries to say little girl, and she denies him that because that's again too close. Also, dad is completely removed except for very specific moments in the play where you'll hear it. Like when she says it, she's choosing to say it. Yeah, all these family words, all these like emotional words that would be very challenging. There's a big question that she wants answered that is the sort of real talk question. She can't ask the question for half of the play, over half of the play.
Yeah, which loaded questions, loaded words. And yeah, I mean, I think about those hard conversations that we might have in families or groups of friends, and how hard, and that's what I mean when we're talking about how difficult it can be having to have those conversations because of those loaded words, and like how do we navigate that kind of atmosphere with nuance even, because that can be tricky depending on your situation.
And then the other way that I'm using these fractures, so you have the loaded words, but you also have this representation of these two people who don't know each other trying to have small talk and removing the words from the small talk so that it's even more small talk. And so then it really just becomes like words. And so that's the other use of the absence is there's a scene where they're trying to compare what they like. And I got it from, I was on a streetcar years ago, and I heard these two women behind me who clearly I guess knew each other, but didn't really know each other. And they were having the most painful small talk conversation I've ever heard. And I was like, they're actually saying nothing. There's nothing, like, it's just words.
When you have full conversations that there's nothing in them, and then you're like, what did I just do for an hour and a half?
Yeah.
What did we talk about? A lot of first dates are like that. So you know, it's one of those things we're all up against.
So I guess in those moments you ask yourself what's not being said.
Yeah.
So then that feels like, I was just thinking in terms of having difficult conversation, I tell clients, lead with love. If you lead with love, and if you can't find that, wait until you can. That, I think, difficult conversation, lead with love. Just keep that in mind, because you're obviously having this conversation with this person because you care and you love. So lead with that first and let that be the guide. Yeah.
It feels like this is not new at all, of course, but on YouTube Shorts and things like that, there's this new word for it, this responsive parenting, where it's very lead with love, and it's very like if you are feeling upset, to wait until you can come back and mirror not being upset for your child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
I would
can
feel
attest.
so, because I feel like you'd have to separate yourself from certain situations for a second to just be like, I need to just
And to be human is
and
to be
to-
emotional, you know?
to be human. And I think also when we go back to say like the ideal construct of a family, I think there's a lot of people who aspire to a very specific version of being a parent or how to be a leader or any of those things. And I think when you say something like lead with love, it means to remove that expectation a little bit, right? Remove that ideal of what you think or how you think you should respond in that moment.
Like what you said about just get rid of the ideal family, like the first, and that kind of frees up space to make that
Yeah.
however you, yeah.
Do you deal in your practice with radical acceptance? Can you explain it to me?
What is radical acceptance?
By
I would
Tara
like
Brach.
to know.
It's
I have no idea.
based on a book, I think. You're talking about Tara Brach. She's a psychotherapist and a Buddhist meditation teacher. She has a lot of meditation that you can access online for free. She's very funny, which is always a plus. Radical acceptance, as I understand it, is just loving yourself. Having compassion is like the balm that can do that to healing. The past relational trauma, whatever. So for that to happen, you have to radically accept who you are without judgment. And for me, that's what that's about, being compassionate with yourself. And that may be like the way we talk to ourselves, and we've all done this. It's so harsh. We would never, ever talk to another human being the way we talk to ourselves. We'll spill some water and you're like, God, I'm such an idiot. Like, would we ever say that to another person? We'd be
They
like,
spilled water?
yeah, you'd be like, oh, it was an accident.
Myekah's like, yes, I would.
It depends on that person.
Okay, maybe bad example, but like maybe, so that's when the radical acceptance, I think, comes in. Like, yeah, just speak to yourself as you would speak to your best friend or even stranger. And the work then is that you notice how you talk to yourself in that very critical negative place, and then project it outwards and say, would I ever talk to, Myekah this way? No. And then just notice the dissonance between that. And that's where the radical acceptance comes in.
Thank you. I was like, I don't quite know if this really.
It's a good book. Yeah.
I believe that a lot of the characters could use some radical acceptance within this play.
Yeah, they're
think we
trapped,
all
eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, the characters are really. I have to I do believe, because they're my characters, that they want, all of them want to do the right thing, but they're just so afraid. All of them are so afraid, and with that, I think, comes this like hate of self, hate of each other.
Defensiveness.
Yeah, closed off.
Just the thing that I noticed is how much they want. They're so desperate. They yearn for this connection. To and how isolated all of them are, because they don't have the language or the words, which is how we communicate.
I will say, there's frequent moments within this play that I feel like I want to give every character a hug at different times. So I feel like that really speaks true to how they're doing. With all of that being said, do you believe that humans can change and are redeemable? Can they make that path? Could these characters go on that path if they had all the time in the world past the play?
Oh, I want to answer this so much, but I don't want to spoil the play. Where it ends, I want to tell you, what I imagined for it, but I won't. To answer your question, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm always hopeful.
Gosh, I hope we all think that. I hope you have to, of course, is like my answer. Yeah.
I went through a phase as a playwright of really delighting in ending my plays in horrible ways, like very Greek ways. Like I wrote a play where I borrowed from, I'm not sure which Greek playwright this is, but the baking your child son in the pie and feeding it to the father.
I think that's Titus and Jun.
Yeah. So I was like that was peak tragedy for me. And then I remember I had a director who I was developing a new play with, and she said, maybe with this one we could end with hope. And since then, it's a much more delightful process.
It's good to have hope.
Yeah, you know? Yeah. But that's not to say it's not complicated. I think this play, that's not a spoiler for this play, because I think the ending of this play is very complicated.
I would agree. But I think also life is complicated, and
Yes.
art reflects life. So, I mean, we're going for a circle, so it makes sense.
But that's what makes life great too, right? It's
Yeah.
such a mess. It's such a hot mess, and it's so beautiful and crazy and up and down. If you can embrace all of that, I mean, that's what life is.
This is true.
It's not personal.
Hopefully not. Okay, and I think I have like one other question, sort of, which is like completely left field from all of this, I guess, because I'm just gonna throw it out there. But the play deals a little bit with false memory or learning or finding memories that might not have necessarily started there. And I think my question is, when we are looking at being hopeful or accepting these things, do we have a frequency to maybe amplify or change things in our minds due to nostalgia or hope? Or have you ever come up against that in your worlds?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for people with very traumatic backgrounds to have huge gaps in memory. That's very common. It's a coping survival skill. If you're young, I work with women specifically who've had childhood sexual abuse in their background. So for them to survive that horrific past, you have to make a narrative or just erase it in order to survive. So absolutely, that's yes,
Very common response.
a necessary response, I think, too, sometimes.
And is it conscious?
I don't, well, the gaps in memory, people will just have large patches where you just can't access like huge swaths. So I don't think that's conscious. I want to say mostly not. When you're that young, if you're a child, you're trying to cope. And then I think you may get kind of caught up in it, you know, and the mind it's easy to fool our minds, to be honest, and our minds will play tricks on us all the time. It'll create thoughts that are just not true. So the example I give is someone who's suffering from anorexia. They might look at themselves and think they're fat. That's just not true. The mind plays tricks on you all the time. So when we say close your eyes and imagine your happy place, it has an immediate effect of calming you down. The mind and the body are connected, and it's easy to trick our minds. So you know, our minds tell us stuff all the time that's just not true. They tell us we're not worthy of love, that, you know, we're stupid, we're flawed, we're you know, all these things that are just not true. And those are some of the things that I work with a lot with so many of us. I think we can go down that path. So I don't think it's conscious. I think in people who have had very big traumas, it was a survival skill. It's just how they survive. So that's what they know, and what they know that's familiar. They've, you know, the neural pathways are there, and they just go down that pathway. And but the great thing is our brains are plastic. We can find new ways of learning, coping, dealing, but that takes time. But it can absolutely happen, for sure.
And the flip side of that too is like what a beautiful thing for your brain to do if you are going through something traumatic to create a false memory to take care of you, right? To keep you alive. Yeah.
Keep you safe.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I always think is a really tragic but also really beautiful thing, is this ability to find fantasy or hope in something that might not actually have happened, but it allows you to continue, which is the good thing, is to continue to move forward. Do you ever find that over time and over speaking through these things that sometimes these false memories or these false ideals start to fade away and reality, or the reality of the situation might fall in, or? Okay.
Yeah, but some of that coping stuff is, you know, leads to resilience. But yeah, absolutely. You know, we keep these memories at bay, and I think, you know, Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a good place, yeah. So.
When I was started writing this play, I was very interested in memory first, and what that looks like, because you're right. You can have the same memory as somebody else, and you'll remember it differently. And then it became, okay, what's the next step after memory? And that was where it was this conscious creation of fantasies. You see that in the play. It goes from, do you remember this, to yes, and this, which is maybe a fantasy. And then, because it's a play and it's fun, then the next step in that is lies. So you have fantasy, which is like a fabrication in good faith, and then you have lies, which can still be fabrications in good faith, but also fabrications in not so good faith. Yeah. Which you see both of them in this play.
You do see both of them in this play. I think both that serve the beauty of a relationship and hoping and striving for something more, and some that are maybe more self-serving in depending on the person.
Yeah, and there's a line in the play where one of the characters says, why shouldn't a fantasy hold feeling? And I think about that feels like the crux of the play for me, is if you say something and it's not true, if for example, this character wants to say I love you, but it's too complicated, there's too much in the way of that actually being received and believed by these people. If he constructs this fantasy that says the same thing through the story, and it hits and she believes it, then is that okay? Because he's still describing a true emotion and true sentiment, but he's doing it in a way that is morally dubious, perhaps not the right way to get to it. But if she's blocked off and she won't receive it when it's true, when it's fact, then getting to it in a roundabout way is maybe appropriate.
Easier to accept.
Maybe dysfunctional.
Yeah. But I mean.
Yeah, I want to make a distinction for some reason about the lies we tell ourselves and then the lies we tell others. I don't know. Yeah, because sometimes we lie to ourselves and we don't even know, we're not quite aware of it. Whereas I feel like maybe, I don't know, that I want to make that distinction for some reason. Not sure why.
The lies we tell ourselves and the lies we tell other people. And I guess it's all the intention of the way in which you're saying the thing. What is the intention behind the words, as we were saying, I think, at one point. So what is the intention behind the lie as to how it serves? I guess that's why we, white lies or omissions of truth and things like that exist. Oh, yes.
A lie is when you're trying to say something not true. Right? Now, do people try to say something to themselves that's not true?
Yeah, I think so, because the truth is so painful sometimes. You know, the truth could be very painful. Like if the truth is that my parents never loved me, that might be a truth that's too painful for some to accept. So you may end up telling a version of that, or a lie of that. So I do think there are truths that are really hard to accept. Beyond I don't like your dress. The stuff like, my own mother doesn't love me. That's a pretty hard truth, and I think it is out there. So you may end up, that's really hard for anyone to, even thinking about it, it's upsetting to me. So you may end up not quite heading, the way you said, there are just some things that are getting in the way of the truth that you may use that in order to protect yourself, I guess. So I could see that. Does that answer your question? Or
does a lie have to be conscious? I think part of the distinction here, maybe put words in your mouth. You can consciously lie to yourself? I mean, there's some, if you know you're lying, this is like the liar paradox. If you know you're lying, then are you lying? Then it's not a lie because it doesn't work.
Yeah, head is hurting a little bit.
Oh, that's very
Yeah.
The
interesting.
terminology of a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Etymology of the word.
Our language is so full of these sayings like fake it till you make it. The thing about the hat, make it fit, or if the shoe fits. It's part of our language that lying to ourselves becomes blind. It becomes blind all of a sudden, or it evolves into, okay, I will fake it till I make it. And the survival tactics we create for ourselves so that we can go on another day, no matter how painful it may be.
Yeah, you may need to lie, unconsciously, consciously to yourself to move on, to live, to survive.
Kind of lie until it becomes your truth, I guess. On the
Right, and then it does become.
Well, yeah, and that, just talking about memory, like if you tell the same lie enough times, historically, like let's say you lie about something that happened when you were a kid, and then at what point does that just become your memory? Because memory is so malleable, and every time you remember a thing, it has the risk of changing, and it does change in your brain. And so, like, yeah, how many times do you tell a lie until it actually just becomes your truth, and maybe you do believe it because it's like become actually like an implanted memory?
Yeah.
That is one of the ways that you can actually pass a lie detector test if you are lying, but if you convince yourself that the lie is true, then you can fool a lie detector test over time, because you're able to slow your heart rate, do all of those things, because it becomes something that is true to you, even if it's not
how
true.
do you convince yourself it's true?
This,
Repetition.
yeah, it's the repetition of it. Fake it till you make it.
How important was the medium of theater itself? Because especially I think of a story like this, if it was told, say, in a movie versus on stage, I'm just more aware of the notion, the factor of authenticity when it comes to theater. So I just wondered, like, as you were writing this, how important was it to consider the bounds of theater?
Space. Yeah. The best compliment I can ever get for anything I ever write is when someone says this has to have been theater. I'm very interested in writing for the form, and I feel like I'm at a place in my writing where anytime I have a story, it's not good enough to just research the story and start writing the story. For me, it's what's the container that's going to hold it so that the container itself is telling a part of the story. So for this play, it was the fractured language because it felt like a play about communication. Let's just rip out the communication. And I love, doesn't happen in this play, but I love when things fall from the ceiling. I love using the space and the I don't want to say limits, because I think it's actually the potential for the space. And also the potential, like putting this in the extra space was so perfect because it's this very intimate look at these three people in a family, and I think in a bigger space you have distance from that, but you're right up. Like the set is so beautiful, and it's her house, and you're like in her house because the space is so tight. So for me, it feels like it's really like you come face to face with these people, and if you were able to zoom away from that, it wouldn't have the same sort of all-encompassing effect of you being present, physically present. Yeah.
Sorry, I just got to do a quick time trick. There we go. Okay, so do we have more questions actually before I ask? Oh, okay.
I wasn't raising my hand, but actually I did want to ask a question. I feel like in a conversation that Chelsea, you and I had like early on, you had mentioned the concept of like maladaptive daydreaming in reference to the play, and I guess I'm just curious because we have a psychologist here, like if I don't
So when can you say more about the maladaptive daydreaming? Like what specifically are you thinking or referring to?
I guess just like as a concept, a strategy that people use, whether it's maybe intentional or not, or like I don't think it's like a DSM diagnosis, but like as a psychological concept that happens.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the maladaptive sort of there's the judgment call to daydreaming, like it's not, so it feels like it's almost built in, but I guess it really depends on what that would be like. So it's so frustrating in therapy, so much of the answer is it depends. so I guess I would, like do you have a specific example that you could maybe?
Could you define what that is? Maladaptive daydreaming?
Well, I think, and jump in, like, I think it's like daydreaming that's not helpful or maybe even harmful in some ways. Is that?
I don't even remember this conversation, but for sure, I think no, but I can support that we had that memory. And actually what's been done in this play, there are these moments where there are these beautiful sound cues and light cues that kind of suck her out of the present moment while someone's telling her a story of something. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that's where that daydreaming comes in, that it's like it takes over and she's not able to be present anymore because it's more comfortable or it's more beautiful to be somewhere else.
It's like a disassociation?
Yeah, kind of, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to give too much of the play away, but the daughter has like a daydreaming or a fantasy that's just not true regarding her partner. Is that saying too much? Anyway, I don't want to. And that feels anytime there's a dissociative state, that's definitely a place to get curious. Like something is happening that's overwhelming you in a way that you can't be present. Like that's definitely the place to get curious. So if that is happening, then I would. That's a time to get curious. Not judge. This is a coping strategy, but something is overwhelming you in a way that you need to dissociate or adopt these maladaptive daydreaming tactics. So again, I would definitely get curious about that, and dissociative states, or those are that takes you away from the present, the here and now, because so much of the time we're spending time in the past wanting to change, but the past is past, we can't change it, and then we use that to project onto a future which has not happened because it's uncertain, so we go back between the past, which can't be changed, and onto a future which hasn't happened.
So you can't be in the...
Yes, and that takes you out of the here and now, which is really the only moment that's real and we have. So a lot of the grounding techniques in trauma is to get you out of the past, when you perseverate, because we can't, the past is past, we can't change it, but often we'll use that to project onto a future which hasn't happened yet. So that's what really the grounding, the mindfulness, the meditation is, to bring you here in the present now. So I would put the maladaptive daydreaming into somewhere there, that using the past to project onto a future. So then I think it would, for all of us to be here, like this moment is real, like all of us here and now, this is real. So the more we can ground ourselves in the present, that can be really helpful and healing and all those stuff.
And I think a lot of people, whether they're aware of it or not, cope through disassociation, at least on some level, I think. Because I think maybe all of us have daydreamed here at some point, where we just find our mind wandering, but it allows for us to feel, good for a little while.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, I would make a distinction between daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming, so I would make that distinction.
I guess there's a there's a spectrum of daydreams.
It's interesting because we follow the adult daughter. She's sort of our anchor, and she wants to talk about the past. Whether she's capable of doing that or not is up for debate, but that's what her want is. She wants to have that conversation. And the other people in her life are the ones that are saying, why can't we just let that lie and move forward? So actually, now that I'm hearing this, like maybe they have the healthier. I mean, I think you need to have the conversation about the past in order to move on. But it's interesting that they're actually the ones that are saying, let's be present, be present in the now. And she can't. She's so connected to that.
Right,
that past.
and they want to help her. Obviously, they love her and they want to bring her to the present. But there's something that's keeping her stuck in the past. There's a yearning there, and I think, it's a really wonderful play.
It is. I'm really happy you all get to see it very soon. Okay, so for my final question, I suppose, final thoughts. After writing the play and seeing the play, what is one thing you would like to say to the individuals who are about to see the play?
Oh. Well, first of all, thank you. Sorry, were you going to say something?
But pay attention to.
Yes, yeah. What would you like to pay? Yes.
Well, bringing up pay attention is funny because that actually is great advice for this play. It's very fast, and there's a lot. They say a lot, and we actually added an intermission a couple of shows ago just to give audiences that chance to go away and sort of let it settle before they added more, which was a great call, and it really works. I don't know what my parting advice would be. Pay attention, but
Just pay attention.
Yeah, go. Like I hope that people go in ready and kind of game for a different form, a playful form, a theatrical form, while it also being very rooted in a very real family that is complicated and tender and challenging.
I might say pay attention to what's not being said.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with both, is what I'm saying. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening and chatting with Chelsea and Catherine with me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, especially seeing the show. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.